Good evening, good evening. Welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. We're gonna jump into things now and get started. So this is a webinar on rites of passage, and in particular, how to use wilderness-based expeditions to nurture positive masculinity within the next generation of men. And before we keep going, typically we start with a land acknowledgement, but myself and my colleagues, we always try to avoid land acknowledgements being just a pattern thing that you say without really thinking about it. And I'll say this, I have been doing a lot of travel for Next Gen Men recently, speaking at conferences and that kind of thing. And something I became aware of was I have this really bad, I don't know if you call it a bad habit, but I have this habit of traveling without thinking of the history, the present, or the future of the land that I'm traveling to. And sometimes I would find the time to visit, for example, nativeland.ca and learn a little bit about the traditional territories that I was visiting, but often I wouldn't even think of it. And I'm saying that out loud to role model. Reconciliation is not about getting things perfect. It's about realizing, the invisible assumptions that you've made, or the privilege that you carry, or the things that you don't do. And starting with that awareness to then transition towards new ways of being, new ways of relating to people, to land, and ultimately towards our future. And one more thing to add on to that, like I use a map of the residential school system often when I do when I do land acknowledgements, and that's because I work with a lot of schools. And this webinar is about, in some way, like a bit of a summer camp, quote unquote, summer camp program. And so those sorts of, school institutions and sleepaway camps, like we would do well to remember that we're part of a legacy that has caused a lot of harm. And so I feel an extra sense of duty and responsibility to balance that out by working at it and making space in my brain and my heart for it. In terms of what we're going to do, I'll start by introducing myself. I'll do a quick intro of Next Gen Men. I'll introduce Stephanie, my colleague, who's going to do some co-facilitation with me. And then we're going to jump into talking about rites of passage. I've been thinking about how to make this like interactive and interesting. And man, I went looking for videos and found first of all, I've done lots of curating of like short film, like meaningful video. And I was like, there's no shortage of videos reflecting rites of passage and boys growth towards manhood. So I did some hand selecting of a couple that will reflect at us different elements of the steps of a traditional rite of passage. So we'll get to that in a moment, but I'm going to use these videos as like sort of discussion prompts. So long story short, this is an interactive session. Again, I'll introduce myself, I'll introduce Next Gen Men, and then I'll introduce Stephanie, and I'll explain why. To begin with, my name is Jonathan. I'm Next Gen Men's Director of Programs. My background's in education. So I spent a couple of years as a teacher, and I spent about 10 years in the summer camps industry, mostly in management at a summer camp in Algonquin Park. And I've just got a huge passion, first of all, for boys' well-being and positive development, and also for wilderness-based travel and all that it can teach us about ourselves, about the world around us, and about what we're capable of. One more thing I'll say is like I had the opportunity to write about this recently in Next Gen Men's blog, a blog post about rites of passage. You can find it at nextgenmen.ca/blog. And I reflected on, for me, when did I like make that transition? And for me, it was a year that I spent living in France. I was 18 years old. And I like navigated a student visa. I navigated like a transportation, accommodation, and then like hitchhiking, traveling, going to class, like all these kinds of things in a completely new place. And that pushed me in a lot of ways. I made a lot of mistakes. I did some things right, but really had a formative experience that when I look back on, it sounds like very trite, if that's the right adjective. It sounds right. I don't know if it is, but it sounds kind of trite to say this. I left Canada as a boy and I came back as a man. I wish I hadn't said that. That was like a total mistake. Forget I said that. Let me tell you just a little bit about Next Gen Men. I'm totally wrong. I got this slide out of order. I'm going to skip this and come back to it. Next Gen Men is an organization that's focused on engaging boys and men in the movement for gender justice. And there's a lot I could say about Next Gen Men. I want to hit you with three main principles that guide our work and in particular influence the Rite of Passage Expeditions project. The first is effective entry points. A lot of nonprofit organizations, educators, people talk about meeting people where they're at. And I can find sometimes that like we say it, but we don't do it as much as we think we do. And this is something that we carry really close to our heart at Next Gen Men. We are looking for those effective entry points to whether it's vulnerable conversations, moments for growth and reflection, new connections or realizations, whatever it is, that entry point, getting that foot in the door or that kid in the room or on the trip is something that we take really seriously. The next is relationship over everything else. And I think it was a psychologist named Bruce Perry who, or maybe somebody else, who said, relationship is the medium through which we do everything that we do. And again, we take that really seriously too. And it guides a lot of our work. For example, I don't do a school workshop without learning everybody's names. And that for me is about just like the centrality of relationship. And then lastly, a strengths-based approach. Again, this kind of rolls off the tongue because I say it a lot, but that we don't view boys as problems to be fixed, or even just as allies for girls and women, but as shared stakeholders in the movement for gender justice, positive masculinity, whatever it might be. Okay, now I'm going to introduce Stephanie. I'll go back to that slide I skipped and then we'll get started. The reason I'm introducing Stephanie is because I'm recording this for people that couldn't be here, for posterity, for the future. And when I was thinking about talking about this with Stephanie, I was like, how do we do a recording where we have interaction in the Zoom chat? Next Gen Men's pedagogy is highly interactive. It's really important to us that people are getting their own minds and voices activated. But in a recording, you can't say the Zoom chat happened. So what Stephanie and I are going to do is kind of treat this like a bit of a podcast situation. Stephanie's going to talk out loud. We still do invite interaction in the Zoom chat, but Stephanie and I are going to treat it like our own personal webinar, like it's just the two of us. So Stephanie, I invite you to. I'm not sure what this is going to look like in the recording, by the way. I haven't done a Zoom recording in a while, but I invite you to come off mute and introduce yourself as well.
Hello, everybody. My name is Stephanie. I am Next Gen Men's Youth Program lead, and I also facilitate and lead the Rites of Passage Expeditions program with Jonathon, which I love. My background is also in the summer camp world, and I was a canoe trip guide for many, many summers, leading trips of 2 to 36 days long with teenagers, and the last couple summers been leading backcountry hiking trips with teenage boys, and I just love every second of it. It's really, honestly, the thing I look forward to the most about my summers is being able to go out there with all them. Outside of the Rites of Passage trips, I help run our Discord server. I'm running an evaluation for our Discord server as a promising practice for gender-based violence prevention in the country. And I also get to talk to educators all across North America and the world and parents and help them sort of navigate what's going on with the masculine identifying youth in their life and help direct them to resources that we provide. And yeah, that's a little bit about me. Back to you, Jonathon.
Thank you. Okay, and so for the slide that I skipped, I'll just go back to it and say it's really important to me that we recognize this is not hypothetical. Next Gen Men's work, your presence in whether you're in the webinar or watching the recording, like this is motivated by real young people who we care about. And so I just want to take a moment and have everybody think of a real young person, whether he's in your family, or on your street, in your classroom, in your mind, in your heart. Just who is that person? Think about it. Take a moment and send positive vibes. I'm going to do that right now. Got it. And then just to bring our care for them into into the room, we'll get you to throw that in Zoom chat as well. So to delve into rites of passage, my first sort of discussion, and Stephanie, I'm going to get you to come off mute in a moment, is to respond to the question, when you think of the regular rites of passage that characterize our society, what comes to mind? And I have a couple of prompts. So let's go, Stephanie. Let's do like 20 seconds on each. When you think of the clothing, that's a weird place to start. I'm not totally sure why I did that. Maybe let's start with what rites of passage do you think of before we get to clothing? That was like a total jump. First of all, what rites of passage can you think of? You go first, Stephanie.
I think of marriage.
My turn. Um, graduation. Any others?
I think, yeah, like religious ceremonies. So like a baptism.
Yeah, baptism, bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah. Okay, now let's go to clothing. So what kinds of clothing are we seeing in these contexts?
Back to my marriage example, a wedding dress.
Right. Wedding dress is really specific. I
Mm-hmm.
know a kid is graduating grade 8 this year, and he's under the impression that his parents are going to pay for his suit, and he's making money to buy these white and red Air Jordan mid tops. So the shoes are like the central piece of his vision for his grad outfit. But yeah, grad like usually has formal clothing, and different youth take that in a different direction. Any other ideas?
Yeah, like a cap and gown too for
Mm,
graduation.
right.
A blue tuxedo for prom.
Yeah, yeah, fair enough. What about like phrases? Okay, easy. I do as a wedding phrase. Any other phrases that come to mind?
There's got to be like pledges. Like I pledge. I don't know why I pledge is the thing that comes to mind.
Okay, I feel that. I also, this is kind of dark, but I thought of ashes to ashes, dust to dust, which is like a funeral. I think it's a Bible verse, maybe. I'm not totally sure. Next prompt is witnesses. Who's at these rites of passage?
Your parents, your
Mhm.
family, siblings.
I'd say usually family, extended family,
Mm-hmm.
most of the family. I think that's my last question. Oh, and then examples. So we've already talked about this, but weddings, graduation, funerals that I just touched on, coronation. Past Jonathon thought of coronations as a rite of passage. Hadn't thought about that one. What I'm getting at here is that rites of passage, while they are like the adjective that came to mind for me was ancient. I don't know if that's really the right way to put it. Like these are sort of timeless. Rites of passage have existed for a long time. They're still well, like present, alive and well in 2025. That being said, a lot of our rites of like there aren't as many rites of passage oriented towards the transition from youth to adulthood as we might wish that there were. And I want to share a story. I thought about looking for, I did look for this video clip actually. It's from a movie, and it's sort of an indie film called Les Miserables. It's not the musical. You might be thinking, oh, I've heard of this. It's not the musical. It is French, but it's this indie film that came out a couple of years ago. And I found this clip. The clip that I found was like low resolution and had Spanish subtitles. So I decided not to use it. But and I won't even really bother telling you the whole, like the film revolves around this conflict between a group of young people, specifically young boys in a particular neighborhood in Paris, their conflict with the police. And one of the boys gets physically assaulted by a police officer. And the very last scene, which skip the next like 4 minutes if you don't want any spoilers for this movie, which I do highly recommend, but hopefully this isn't too much of a spoiler. The very last scene revolves around like a final confrontation with this kid holding a Molotov cocktail that's on fire with a police officer pointing a gun at him. And the quote that it fades to black, and the quote that is shared, because I had this moment while I was watching this where I was like, why is this called Les Miserables? The quote that's shared is, watch me speak French. Are you ready? Mes amis, retenez ceci. Il n'y a ni mauvaise herbe, ni mauvais homme. Il n'y a que les mauvais cultivateurs. Wow. Jonathan can speak French. We're here for it. The English translation is, my friends, remember this. There are no bad weeds and there are no bad men. There are only bad farmers or cultivators or gardeners or whatever you might want to call it. The reason I'm sharing that story is not to say that any particular parent is a bad cultivator, but to say that the world that we are immersed in is rarely cultivating the best in boys by default. Often, boys are exposed to all kinds of pressures and expectations, microaggressions, crossed boundaries, physical violence, like whatever it might be, that put them on this roadmap towards is it too much to say like an underdeveloped like sense of their potential, like who they could have been if they were their best selves? And one of the pieces that that could point us towards the best possible outcomes for the next generation of men is more effective rites of passage. So what are rites of passage? First of all, the phrase, again, this is French. I don't know if France is on rites of passage, everybody. They know what they're talking about. This guy was an ethnographer. He studied traditional cultures all around the world in the 19th century. And he wrote a book from like sometimes in the 1850s or something like that called the Rites de Passage. And what he was observing in this book was a consistent pattern of marking the transition of an individual from what he called subgroup to the next. So childhood to adulthood, from life to death, from single to togetherness, that he was noticing each of these traditional ceremonies, practices that he found in different cultures in the world, like they have common threads. The three different stages that he identified and what we're going to talk about for the next sort of about 30 minutes is, first of all, a separation stage, a departure from the familiar context and identity so that something new can take place. Within that separation was a stage of transition, a liminal space in which those who are part of that subgroup go through a transition and become carriers of a collective story and or take on a particular challenge. And lastly, the stage of return, to re-enter the community, being recognized for having changed and being affirmed for the unique gifts and talents that you bring in your new role within that community. So what we're going to do is jump into these and we'll talk about them one at a time. The first is the stage of separation. So what this looks like on Next Gen Men's wilderness-based expeditions is, first of all, getting away from those quotidian familiarities. I apologize for my vocabulary. That was a really strange thing to say, but like class, teacher relationship, peers relationship in school, phones, the distractions of video games, Brawl Stars, Fortnite, that kind of thing. Who you are in these contexts, you know who you are in your school, in your family. There's a familiarity there, and that familiarity is good. It's comfortable. It's part of who you are, but it's also sometimes hard to change when you're surrounded by the expectation to continue being who you've been. So the separation is about getting away from all that, but not just getting away from it, but establishing connection. So again, with our wilderness-based rites of passage, the way we do this at Next Gen Men is at the same time that we disconnect from the familiar world of that city that we've been part of and those friend groups that we've been part of, we're building a new sort of ephemeral community. We're together here now, and we get to know each other with activities, games, like we play pick up baseball as the sun goes down and do a group stretch in the lawn, whatever it might be, building familiarity with each other so that while we're separated from our everyday lives, we're deeply connected to each other. And I'm going to show a video, and this is where you're going to be back on the hotspot, Stephanie, is I'm going to show this video. I think you might have seen it before, Stephanie. I also don't know how the screen share is going to go, so you can let me know. This video is a group of young guys playing video games together. And one of them asks, would you guys be there for me if I was struggling? And this is how they respond.
Would you guys be there for me if I was going through something?
No.
Nope.
Absolutely not.
I hope it sucks whatever you're going through.
I hope it sucks.
What the fuck?
I hope it emotionally scars you for the rest of your life.
I hope you reach out to me so I can ignore you. I can't wait to go to your funeral knowing that I could have changed that outcome.
Man, what the hell?
Shit got real quick.
I was just asking if you would be there for me.
Okay, Stephanie. Did it sound okay? Did it play okay? That's my first question.
It did.
Okay. And so our first question on the docket is, what elements of what quote unquote stereotypical masculinity do you notice? What's your first thought on that?
Acting tough, this sort of dismissiveness of somebody asking for help and having to take it all on your own.
Yep. Yeah. Pressure to be independent, go through things on your own. There's a song that I genuinely like by Yellow Wolf. The lyrics are something like, you become a man when you handle your own, and you handle your own when you become a man, or something like that. And it's this like cyclical circle. Thank you, Jonathan. That was great. For me, I notice the joking. And I say this sometimes with educators, like everything is a joke. Everything is a joke until it's not. And yeah, so the joking and the like kind of one-upsmanship as well with the joking, that sometimes it's not just a joke, it's a joke that's trying to outdo the previous one. And you can see they start with like, nope, I wouldn't be there for you. And then it ends with like, I wish I could go to your funeral knowing I could have changed the outcome. That they've escalated the joke. Anything else that you noticed, Stephanie? No pressure.
Yeah, I feel just the lack of vulnerability of like needing to be guarded. But it's also interesting in a unique way because I feel like if you kind of like dive deeper into what they're saying, if you just flip it around to an opposite, it probably shows actually what they may be thinking, which is that they do want to be there for each other, and they know why bring up a funeral or what the potential consequences could be of that if you're not aware of it. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which brings us to the second question, which is, do you think this is a healthy or unhealthy friendship? I mean, I positioned the question like it's a binary, and I don't think that, real relationships are necessarily that simple. For me, when I listened, the more that I've listened, the first time I heard this, I was like, wow, that is toxic. The more that I've listened to this clip, the more so what I think is the subtext that they're all aware of is the answer is, of course I'd be there for you. And they head into this joking direction. And the reason they're so amused by it is because they already know the answer is yes, I'd be there for you. But like, let's just play around with the idea that I wouldn't. So I think overall, again, I don't know if it's really that helpful to say it's a healthy or unhealthy. I think overall, I think that there is a lot of positivity and trust and support in this friend group that we're listening to. However, I don't think it's as simple as that. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, the fact that they're actively talking about the idea of asking for help shows that there's obviously an ounce of trust there. And the fact that they're all playing together, it sounds like there's already an established group that they are familiar with one another. So that in that way, it would be healthy. But yeah, I think if you're to simply observe this just on the surface, you'd be like, well, that's just atrocious and horrible. Like, how could they say that to one another and be friends? But if you dive a little bit deeper, I think there really is possibly connection going on. And I'd be curious to see the way that they speak to each other one-on-one versus in the group setting.
Totally. Yeah, that's a really good point too. So I came across this on Instagram. I don't remember how I succeeded in downloading it, but these are some of the Instagram comments. People saying, those are the actual guys who'd be there for him, like they are. And someone's saying kind of similar to what we've said, like they're probably really good friends, but at the same time, like this is pretty terrible. And the two top comments from that were, it's not at all terrible, and that's literally what a male friendship looks like. Like these guys would be the ones who would be there for him. So again, we can kind of see both in how people are like responding to this. And I guess what I want to put out there in the context of, especially in the context of these wilderness-based trips, which are designed with a lot of intention, is let's say, for example, the subtext is, yeah, I'd be there for you. The question then for me becomes like, how does he know? How does he know they actually would? Especially when they've had this like joking, camaraderie of like, no, I wouldn't, right? But like so even if there's this subtextual sense of, yeah, these guys would be there for me, how does he actually know? And I didn't include the clips in, a screenshot of this in this webinar, but it's worth saying Next Gen Men has done some research with boys, and one of the things that we found was this fascinating dissonance between what boys believed and what they actually did. And for example, with regard to mental health and asking for help, we had something like 2 in 3 boys say, it's not true that guys have to go through things on their own. Guys should be able to ask for help. So it's the majority, right? 2/3 of boys saying it's okay to ask for help. And then we had 1/3 of boys who had ever actually done it, like who had ever actually asked for help. And before you start thinking, well, most of them probably didn't need, like basically every boy in the study that we did had said, I feel like I'm not myself. I'm overwhelmed. I'm stressed. They all knew that sometimes they were struggling, and it was only 1/3 that had actually asked. So there's this dissonance between boys believing, hey, this friend group has got my back, but actually being able to say, I'm struggling. Could I talk to you about it? That's a big step. And it's not enough to just know they'd be there for you. They need to actually feel it. Which brings me to, just talking a little bit more about these rite of passage expeditions that we do. Like I said, especially the first couple of days of the trip are really, like, they do revolve around relationship building. So whether we're playing, this is a photo of us playing spike ball, but whether it's spike ball or baseball or even packing our bags or explaining, the route, whatever it is, like we're very intentionally connecting with each other, knowing that we're about to go through a challenging experience. And one of the things that challenging experience is going to do is put proof of concept. We're not just here for each other in theory, we're here for each other in action. One quick quote that I want to share. These quotes are from my own sort of written reflections after each trip each year. And this is actually a quote from my handwritten journal where I was journaling during the trip, where I was reflecting on the fact that for me, there's something different. There's a handful of people that I could think about that I'm like, I feel something about this person that I don't feel about others. Even when I haven't talked to this person in like a long time, I know I would be there for him at the drop of a hat. And one of these people is a person that I used to rock climbed with at the rock climbing gym like almost every day through the pandemic. And again, I haven't talked to him in like months at this point, but if he called me right now and said, Jonathan, stop the webinar and come over, I'd be like, done. And part of what built that sense of like trust and connection is going through something really authentically difficult. And so I was reflecting on like, what is different about the relationships that we form in those adverse might not be the right way to put it, but in those challenging conditions. And what I wrote is the connections that we form in these experiences end up feeling different because they are. Because right then they were the only connection we had. They were everything. And so when you've gone through that separation, you don't have your phone, you don't have your familiar, bedroom or friend group or whatever it might be, you turn to what's next to you. And in our context with these wilderness-based expeditions, what's next to you is a group of peers. as well as me and Stephanie. Next stage, and I've really built up to this pretty effectively, is the transition. And the transition, the way I describe it in, again, in the context of our wilderness-based expeditions, is a route, because we're on these backpacking trips or canoeing trips. And so a route that's within the youth participant zone of proximal development. That is like a lot of outdoor education jargon to say it's the middle ground between being super easy and being unbelievably impossible. So this zone of challenge is what we're trying to work within. And but we do want authentic challenge, because what a challenge offers is like a mechanism, and this is maybe not the right way to phrase it, but a mechanism to like strip away the bravado. And like when you're actually challenged, you're just who you are. You're just operating as like, I'm Jonathan and this is the best I can do right now. So I have another video. Same thing, Stephanie, you're going to chime in on behalf of the folks who are contributing via Zoom chat. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. Actually, no, I'll say this. It's a video, it's a cartoon. It's called Bound. And the story, I'm just going to show a clip of it because it's something like 10 minutes long. And I'm just showing a 1-minute clip. The story is the young kid with that you can see in the thumbnail here. His older brother is some sort of competitive fighter and his older brother's injured. So he really wants to step up and take his brother's place. And I think it might have to do with still making money to provide. It's sort of a two brothers on their own kind of situation, but he just really wants to step into that, like, I'm capable, that sense of like capability. And one more thing I'll acknowledge is the subtitle here, Toxic Masculinity is Irrelevant. I just copied the slide and missed changing the subtitle to the slide, but let's take a look at this film. Okay, the first question is, have you ever seen a boy take on more than he's capable of? Which is what's happening in this clip. Or get caught off guard. I'll say something, I'll prime the pump, Stephanie, and say, one of the things that caught my attention in this clip is the look of surprise on his face when he gets punched in the stomach the first time. Like, he's got this, like, gritty kind of, like, he's like, all the, like, this, like, I've got this kind of mindset. And then the first time he, like, actually gets the wind knocked out of him, there's this, like, maybe 3 frames or something like that where you can see he's totally surprised and totally caught off guard. What do you think, Stephanie? Have you seen this happen? What does it look like?
I have seen this happen many times. It has happened to me.
Yeah.
I think we all have experienced this in some way. Yeah, I think it's interesting that in a sense he, in the clip, gets ready and then is caught off guard by the reality, which is literally punching him in the face. And then for a second, it looks like he's going to give up, or he's like, oh boy, maybe I've taken on too much. This is not, I can't do this. But then instead of thinking about it or reflecting about if it's about him, he does the same behavior again and sort of goes, I can do this again. I just gotta, be strong and be tough and jump a bit higher, and tries again. So I think for me, the lesson is, I think sometimes often you'll see young people get injured or get, hurt emotionally in a situation. And sometimes adults in their life will be like, well, they've learned their lesson. They're not going to do that again. But I think sometimes it takes a couple of those lessons to maybe zoom out a bit and go, okay, well, maybe, I could maybe think about this a bit differently or handle, take this step and maybe. So I just think it's about repetition sometimes of the failing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I remember watching this short film for the first time and being quite caught off guard myself that like it didn't follow the traditional like structure of like a Karate Kid, Marvel superhero, the blueprint. I don't know if it's the blueprint, but the model that we're often shown is like if you're gritty enough, if you like try hard enough, if you get back on your feet, like you can take down that adversary, like you can overcome that challenge. And so I remember being like totally surprised when he gets back on his feet, misses, and then gets knocked out. I was like, okay, that's quite realistic. That is how it goes sometimes. Yeah. In terms of the second question, what kinds of things? Like, let's just put some of these out into the air. And I invite the brainstorming and Zoom chat as well. Your turn. You go first. What's an example?
Thinking about so many of the trips I've been on, like physical injuries or testing limits of physicality, like showing how fast you can hike or how hard you can paddle or how fast you can finish the portage or how much weight you can carry on your back. And then ultimately there being an injury or something of that sort. But sometimes there isn't an injury, and then that behavior continues, but there might be an injury down the road, sort of thing, is also something I've seen.
Yeah, that's a good start. In terms of outside of the wilderness-based expeditions context, like I know school is one of the hugest stressors of boys. I know that myself, when I've failed, like job interviews, school applications, scholarship applications, like those kinds of failures can be a real setback, that you're not regarded in the way that you hoped you would be. And that brings me also to like peer groups, social dynamics, relationships, dating, all that kind of thing. So there's a lot, not to mention like family illness, surgery, like socioeconomic struggles, like all kinds of adverse experiences can catch young people off guard, and boys in particular who are trying to follow this model of, again, be gritty, get back on your feet, and go through it alone. Can sometimes learn the hard way that the world is like, maybe this is the wrong way to put it, but like the world is harder than them. And that brings me to the wilderness-based expeditions. Not to say that like we are, like Stephanie and I are like our primary, first of all, the primary priority is safety. The second priority is having a good experience. So we're not doing like grinding, boys into the dirt of the mountains. Like we're quite like approachable, comfortable, and like orienting the whole trip towards being enjoyable, not being hard. But that being said, it's a real world out there with bad weather sometimes, or high elevation sometimes, or a lot of wind sometimes. And whatever it is, we've seen that the natural world will basically put boys in a position where they're daunted, I'd say, where they aren't quite knocked off their feet, but they're, maybe we could say caught off guard by how hard it might be. And Stephanie's examples of like whether it's a portage, or I'll say this photograph is a photograph of the conditions in the midst of a wildfire nearby in the Rocky Mountains. And right after I took this photo, a thunderstorm rolled in. And so we went from doing a bit of like a casual, is the right way to say casual evacuation? Like we knew the weather, the air quality is not good. We're not going to keep doing this loop that we'd envisioned. We're going to start heading back towards, not to the trailhead, but back towards the trailhead. So we had already kind of made that decision. We are navigating the pressure of this wildfire that was in the distance, but still something we were thinking about. Then a thunderstorm happened, it poured rain, and the youth were like, it's the end of the world. Like, I've never seen, I've never been out in conditions like this, an apocalypse situation. And it was genuinely hard, like it was. And what I can say is in those moments, whether it's, a young person being really cold overnight or being caught in this rainstorm, or I'll say this for myself. Like I mentioned, I lived in Europe for a year as a teenager. And anytime that I faced something like that, not that I was facing wildfires, but bad weather, adverse conditions, unexpected mishaps, like whenever I faced something like that, I came through it understanding that I was capable of more than I had previously thought. I don't know if there's anything more important to learn as you grow up than that. That you are more capable than you thought. Like, what an important and valuable lesson to learn. And not just that on our wilderness-based expeditions, but the lesson as well is that you don't go through it alone. So, yeah, this is another quote from one of my trip reflections, reflecting on the way that the young people on our trip, when they were struggling, showed up for each other and kept care of each other. This is what I wrote, that boys all face challenges that feel insurmountable as they grow older. It's one thing to be told, right? And this is what I said back in our, first piece. It's one thing to sort of be told or to believe that you don't have to be alone. It's another thing to have actually felt the close warmth of actively caring for one another. To have actually felt that, whether you were the receiver of care or the caregiver, like that's an unmistakable thing to remember as you grow older. So what we've done is we've separated from the familiar context. We've gone into a deep relationship with each other and then overcome a real challenge that has stripped away the bravado of like, oh, I'm a capable guy. It's like, no, I was actually struggling it there. I was just being myself in the best way that I could be. And the last stage that we go through in this model of the rite of passage is the return. And the return is about being seen for that authentic self, for the strengths that you brought to the group, to the community, and that you'll bring back with you into your family and your school and the rest of your life as you grow older. The return is an honoring ceremony. It looks like different things in different contexts, but really it's the common thread, or like I guess the underlying assumption or belief is that you can't change if no one around you recognizes that you have. That like experience of being seen is like fundamental to growth or transformation. And so what this looks like, well, no, I won't show what it looks like quite yet. I want to say, I guess we end each of our trips with an honoring ceremony that affirms youth for exactly who they are. Now, the video clip that I want to show is the opposite. It's a hazing ceremony. So it's still a ceremony. It's still an quote unquote honoring of a particular way of being, but it's not about honoring people for who they are. It's about the pressure and expectation to show up with that, what researchers sometimes refer to as traditional masculinity ideology, but showing up with that toughness, that bravado, that aggression, and that kind of thing. And my point here is that, these honoring ceremonies, these like initiations exist already. And when young people are building them themselves, they miss sometimes the vulnerability or the authenticity that makes them what our friend Arnold van Gennep, the French ethnographer, would say, like a true rite of passage. Okay, I'm going to show this video clip. It's a clip from this MTV sponsored project called Look Different, and this one's called American Male. It is a relatively violent clip. It's not a cartoon, so I'll just put that out there. And it's just about a minute of a hazing ceremony at a post-secondary institution in the United States.
In order to survive, a chameleon will change color to blend in with its surroundings. At a young age, I began to closely observe the people around me. The way they talked, the way they walked, what they said, where it got them. Now, I am no longer a person, but a set of social cues. Not a person, but a path of least resistance.
I'll just highlight that line one more time. I'm no longer a person, but a path of social cues. I'm no longer a person, but a path of least resistance. Or a set of social cues and a path of least resistance. That path of least resistance is really relevant. That the path of least resistance for adolescent boys is often the often the stereotype. Like, it's easier to fit in, right? And if the fit in, like, the dominant cultural norm is to be dominant aggressive, to not back down, not ask for help, like that that path of least resistance is sometimes what boys will gravitate towards. So I mean, these questions are like a little bit heavy-handed, Stephanie, but what do you think of what does it look like when young men initiate themselves, or what harms might be present when that happens?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like this oneness, right, of falling into the group of what they all believe is accepted and desired from them. And that is fully looking at a oneness and a lack of difference, right? So it's just falling into the mold sort of thing and all being the same in a way and showing up similarly in certain contexts. Which is sad and boring because the differences that we all have are what makes life interesting and beautiful and special. So
Damn. Sad and boring is like quite a verdict. There's
I
not
don't saw.
there's a word that I can't think of that's like, yeah, you really laid it down there. No, but I feel that. I think now, having like listening to you say that, what comes to mind for me is what's interesting is they're honoring something. And what is being honored in this context is not the individual's like uniqueness or their strengths or their passions or, you know, who they are. Like, what's being honored is that dominant group norm. And that's what's being upheld. And yeah, yeah. And so like with what we do, this is you know, I don't have photos of this because this is such like a sacred is not the right word, because sacred is like, I think the definition of sacredness has to do with like religion, but it is sacred. It's like, it's special, you know, it's meaningful, and it's set up in a way that's like, we're not taking photos of this. The previous photo of us sitting with these like pieces of paper around that I have, and you'll see in a couple of slides, like that's a reenactment. It's not even a photo of us actually doing it. But yeah, I'll just say this: we end each of our trips with a slightly different but no less meaningful honoring ceremony, where the reason I wanted to start explaining this is because that young person, each individual young person, is upheld. Like, they are uplifted in front of the group, and everybody's given the opportunity to share the strengths that they saw in that person, the times that that person overcame something challenging, the gratitude that they feel, the admiration or appreciation that they feel towards that person. And it is really unique. It is really like, there's nothing to do with the dominant social norm that's being prioritized above them and what they've individually contributed and what they stand to contribute as a boy growing into a man. And again, I have just a clip, but it's hard to know what to say about this. You kind of have to be there. And honestly, I think, Stephanie, we could both say that like, it's one of the great unimaginable, indescribable privileges of the role we get to play, to be present, to be part of building that ceremony, and to be present within it. So this is a quote from the very first year, where I was sort of just experimenting with this several years ago, and I wrote, "I won't give away the boys' affirmations, but I wrote down the ones they chose for me. Loving is what they said right away. Supportive is what they added next, and then gentle." And that's who I was to them. and the boys are seeing those as strengths. Like they're not saying, yeah, they're not, and those are in like diametric opposition, right, to that video clip that we just saw. We need young men who are loving and supportive and gentle. We also need young men who are like confident and tough. You know, I'm not to say not to say that those aren't also worthwhile attributes, but yeah, this like love and gentleness is like totally yeah, unfortunately undervalued. And so it's kind of funny with this trip that for sure builds toughness and resilience and grit. It also builds support in a way that maybe this is a bit dramatic to say, but I would just say like nothing else really does. I've alluded to this, but like it's just like it's one of like my it's like it's a passion project. It's a total privilege, and I know Stephanie feels the same. We both just feel a lot of gratitude to be able to be part of this project and to have the immense trust of both the young people and the parents and and guardians who are sending them to us to take them into these contexts where I'll just recap. We're separating from the familiar and building a sense of newfound closeness. With that closeness, we're taking on an authentic challenge that teaches each one of us we're capable of more than we ever thought. And then we're recognizing each other for how we showed up in that moment and how much gratitude and appreciation that we have. And I'll leave it at that. Like, this is just an example. We're not the only organization trying to map out new rites of passage for boys growing into men. I was saying before this call started, like, a lot of people are wringing their hands about, like, oh, what to do about boys and young men, with anti-feminist influences on the rise and dominant influencers online. Like, I do genuinely think that rites of passage and the amount of care and attention that gets put into them is a really critical solution. Last couple of things that I'll share as I wrap up, and thanks for being here, is first of all, you can find out more at nexthuman.ca/alliance. I'll talk about that in a moment. nexthuman.ca/expeditions. That's the program and project that Stephanie and I have been talking about. And if you want to look up, you can find stories of the past trips that we've gone on online. Secondly, I want to just acknowledge that I've talked about rites of passage and our wilderness-based expeditions in a really like philosophical way. And I just want to acknowledge that, Stephanie, like we would never just go to a 13-year-old and say, yes, we are drawing upon, the framework proposed by Arnold van Gennep and and then demonstrated by traditional cultures for millennia that were separate. Like none of what we've talked about today is how we would position it for young people. And the reason I put these evaluation statistics in a slide before I close is to say, just to highlight the 100% on the top right of past participants that have said they had a fun, enjoyable experience. Because like, sure, we're building closeness and going through a challenge and doing this, quite, emotional honoring ceremony, but we're also like playing manhunt and like cooking food and like talking about video games and and like we're right there with youth. It's not like this whole thing is like we're sharing the depths of our emotions and nothing else. We're having a lot of fun while we do, and the valuation of past projects have demonstrated that that's how it landed with young people as well. And then I said I'd mention this a little bit further. So I mentioned Next Shaman Alliance. It's just to say that yeah, that a lot of youth who participate in this trips first experience Next Shaman's community as members of this online youth community that we've been running since the pandemic. And Stephanie mentioned it right at the start. It's something that's being evaluated right now as a promising practice for gender-based violence prevention. Again, that's not how we would explain it to youth themselves. We usually just say, we play a lot of Fortnite, and we leave it at that. But if you have a young person who might be interested in video gaming, not necessarily with us, but with a group of, of trusted, positive, supportive peers who are a lot of fun to be around, we've got, 100 or two young people in this community who are a lot of fun to be around. So that's at nexthuman.ca/alliance. And I wanted to put that out there as well. And any final words from you, Stephanie, before I bring us to a close?
No, just thank you all for being here. And I hope that you all get to go outside and experience what we get to experience with some young people. And yeah, because it's the best. Seriously, life-changing. I learn more from them than I think that they learn from me. So Totally. Thanks so much. Okay, thanks, Stephanie, for contributing. Thanks to me
for sharing. I'm just kidding. And thanks to everybody for for giving this some of your time and attention, and thought and love. Until next time, peace.